Hey friends, how you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Zayin, Daf 107 of Masechta Yevamos. Friends, well, what's this? So we start a new parak, the 13th parak of Masechta Yevamos. Friends, as I've basically been saying every day for the past week, we're getting close. I don't know. There's 2 weeks left. Anyways, this parak talks about Me'un. I don't know. Maybe that's arguably interesting. Why not? This little kid just saying sayonara. Well, let's jump in. Top of Daf Kuf Zayin Aleph. My chair is not sturdy. Now what do I do? That's better. Says the Mishnah, Beis Shammai, says Beis Shammai, in Memainin, Ela Arusis, Vesil Arusis and Nesuis. People are yelling. Alright. So, it says Beis Shammai that Me'un, when this minor girl just says sayonara to her husband, so that could only be from Arusa, from betrothal, but not from marriage. And the Gemara is going to jump into this a shtickle. Beis Shammai omim bibal v'lo b'yavim v'sil omim bibal u'v'yavim. Beis Shammai says that Me'un is only with a husband, not with a yavam, right? So if Sarah is a ketana and she's married to Reuven, Reuven dies, and now there's yibum with Shimon. She can't do Me'un from her yavam, okay? But Beis Hillel says that she can. Beis Shammai, once they get married, on the other hand, so then I think it's just push it, her husband, and then, the truth is, according to Beis Shammai, though, he says that you can only do Me'un as an Arusa, not a Nesua, so according to Beis Shammai, even then if you do Yibum, you would be unable to do Me'un, but Beis Hillel says you can do Me'un from marriage, from Nisuin, from as a Yavam, you can do all that stuff. Beis Shammai says Beis Shammai, Bifanov uvesil om bifanav shelo bifanav. Beis Shammai says that Me'un has to be done in the presence of the fellow, whereas Beis Shammai says that Me'un must be done in the presence of the fellow. Beis Hillel says that it can be done in the presence of the fellow, but it can also be done not in the presence of the fellow. Beis Shammai, what does that mean? That he can just push it, leave the house to go to davening, and he comes back and there's a note and it says, I'm out. I guess. Beis Shammai says that Me'un must take place in Bezdin. Beis Hillel says it could be in Bezdin, it cannot be in Bezdin. The Gemara is going to explain what that means. Beis Hillel says to Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel says to Beis Shammai, look, she can do Me'un as many times as she wants, meaning, she could be married to Reuven and say, meh, and just bizounce. Then she can get married to Shimon and say, meh, and then bounce. And then she can get married to Levi and say, meh, and then just bounce. And then she could get married to Yehuda and say, meh, and then just bounce. And she could do the same thing with Yisachar too. And Beis Shammai, I'm sorry if you didn't think that was funny. And then Beis Shammai says to Beis Hillel, Ein bnos Yisrael hefker, that the daughters of Israel are not ownerless. So we don't want her just this ketana marrying a million people. Rather, she does Me'un once, and then she could wait until she gets older, and then v'timan v'tinas, and then she could do Me'un and get married. And the Gemara is going to ask, wait, didn't she already do Me'un? Why does she have to do it again? Okay, beseder. Zok the Gemara, Amar V'Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, my time of the Beis Shammai. So now we're going to see a few different opinions on how come Beis Shammai says that Me'un is only from betrothal, but not from marriage. Once they get married, she can no longer do Me'un, she can no longer just bounce. Amar V'Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, my time of the Beis Shammai, how come Beis Shammai says that Me'un is limited to Erisin, the Fishein Tanai ben Nisuin? Because you can't make stipulations in Nisuin, right? As we learned the other day, in the Perek Ha'isha Rabbah. So we learned that we had discussed a situation where maybe if they went on, what was it? He went on a trip, but it was only after Erisin, so maybe it could be that they made some kind of a Tanai. I think this was Dafka saying when she got lost, whatever it was, that like if it was from Erisin, so then the Yentas might say that there was a stipulation in the engagement, and really what happened was the engagement was the condition was not met, and they were never actually engaged. So that is by Erisin, but not by Nisuin. And Beis Shammai is concerned that if she just kind of walks out of the marriage, well then the Yentis might get the wrong idea, and they might think that actually there was some kind of a stipulation in the marriage, and that's what sort of triggered her to leave. And apparently you could make conditions in marriages, but that's not correct. So therefore, in order to avoid the Yentis getting confused, we say, Beis Shammai says that you cannot do meyun from marriage, but you can do meyun from betrothal, because after all, you can make conditions. You can make betrothals conditional. So therefore, we don't really care if the Yentas don't know that it was meyun and they think it was a condition, right, that wasn't met. That's fine, but we don't want to risk it with the Yentis regarding marriage. So I'm reading that again. My time in the Beis Shammai, Akam Beis Shammai says that meyun is limited to Erisin, because there are no stipulations that are made in Nisuin. And if we allow a Ketana who's married to do meyun, Osi lemeimar, the Yentis might say, Yesh Tanai b'Nisuin, that you can make a stipulation in marriage, which is not the case. Okay, but if that's the case, Beis Shammai is limiting meyun to Erisin, implying that you cannot do meyun in a situation of where she went under the chuppah with him, but they didn't actually have bia. But why not? What's the concern there, right? The condition concern was only by marriage. But what about nichnas al chuppah v'lo nivala? If you shein tanai b'chuppah, well, because you also cannot make a stipulation by chuppah. Okay. What about in a situation where the father, where of course in this case there is no father, because, or let's assume that there's no father because, right, that otherwise the father can marry off midoraisa, right? So let's say the brother gave her to messengers of the husband, so in that case also she would not be able to do meyun. But why not? What's the concern? So lo plug. Over there, it's just that we don't make distinctions. Meaning, if we're saying that that there's no meyun, or if we're saying that meyun is limited to erisin, there's no meyun by nisuin, there's no meyun by nichsal chuppah lo nivel. So there's also no meyun when it comes to when she was given to the messengers of the husband. There also we don't make distinctions. Meyun is only by erisin, nothing else. Rabbanan, fine, lopaluk Rabbanan. Beis Hillel, whereas Beis Hillel responds to this whole approach and says, look, nobody's going to think that there was some kind of a stipulation and she left because there was a condition in the marriage that was not met. Everybody knows that she's a young girl, she's a ketana, that she's an orphan, that her kedushin was only midrabanan anyways, and therefore they're going to know that. Why did she leave the marriage? Because she was too young. We don't think that people are going to say that there was a condition that wasn't met. She did meyun. Rabbi Rav Yosef explained, time of the Beis Shammai, that the reason why Beis Shammai says that meyun is limited to erisin is because because a fellow doesn't want to have be'ilas nus. He wants that that if he's sleeping with his wife in the context of marriage, not just sleeping around with somebody who isn't his wife, right? And therefore what? So as Rashi explains, like kind of the construct for why we want this katana to get married in the first place. Now, possibly society was different back then, but you have this girl who's an orphan, and we don't want her to just be alone in the world. So if we can marry her off, then at least she's accounted for. And so we want to encourage her to get married and accounted for. So the thing is, if we say that she's allowed to just walk out of the marriage at any time, then that's kind of unreliable. And her husband is not going to want to end up retroactively having been sleeping with somebody who was never, having this relationship and relations with somebody who ended up not actually being his wife. And therefore, he's not going to want to marry her in the first place. So therefore, Beis Shammai says, look, once there's nisuin, so then you can't do mayun anymore, and that gives sort of more security to the husband, and he'll be more willing to get married. Fine. So again, so Rabbi Yosef Damar Tabar, time of the Beis Shammai, the reason why Beis Shammai says that mayun is limited to erisin but not nisuin, the fishein adam also bilas nus, that a person does not want to have relationships, not within the context of marriage, and therefore he's not going to want to marry her if he knows that she can always just leave at any time and make the marriage null and void. Okay, fine, but how does that explain why why if she went to the chuppah but they never actually slept with each other, how come she can't just leave then? There's no bilas nus. So lo nichale de tavi chuppah the isur, but still he's not going to be interested in even going into the chuppah knowing that she can just leave, and any potential bia would be outside of the context of marriage. Masar of the shulchan abba Michael Meimar. What about though when she's just goes with the messengers of the husband? They haven't even gotten married yet or anything like that. Shouldn't she be able to do mayun? So lo palag rabbanon. That's just because the rabbis didn't make any distinctions, right? They say mayun is limited to betrothal. It is not in a case of marriage. It is not in a case of chuppah. It is not in a case of being with the messengers of the husband. Whereas Beis Hillel says, look, psychologically speaking, if there was already ksuba, there was already kiddushin, if she then leaves, he's not going to say, oh wow, this was bilas nus. It was more official than that, and therefore we're not concerned that he's not going to get involved in the marriage, because then his bilas nus. I mean, it's more official than that. There was ksuba, there was kiddushin. Papa Omer says, Papa, time of the Beis Shammai mishum pere, time of the Beis Hillel mishum pere. Papa says that the reason for both Beis Shammai's opinion and for Beis Hillel's opinion, right? Beis Shammai, who says that mayun is limited to erisin, and Beis Hillel says that you can even do mayun after nisuin. They're both concerned about the perus nichsei melug, right? That the property that she brings into the marriage, that he can enjoy the fruits of. That is the reason for both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Time of the Beis Shammai, the reason for Beis Shammai is mishum pere, out of concern for the fruits of the nichsei melug, tiyomet nisua timoyin, because if you say that even after they're married, she can always simply leave, shamit ve'achalu mina, the sof l'meifa kaima, he's just going to go and be irresponsible with the nichsei melug, and he's just going to eat them without being concerned for their long-term success and health, and he's going to basically ruin this property. And therefore we say that she can't simply walk out of the marriage, and by saying that, then he'll act more responsibly with the nichsei melug, the Paris nichsei melug. And Beis Hillel says it's actually the opposite. Since you say, right, if you dafka say that she would be able to leave the marriage at any time, he'll dafka do the opposite. He'll dafka go to great lengths to make sure that he's treating the nichsei melug with care, sover, because he holds the lo aitzla kovel mafke la mine. If he's not acting responsibly, he'd be concerned that her relatives would say, you know what, he's not acting responsibly, just leave him. Just leave. Walk out of the house and be gone. Right? And therefore, he's concerned that at any moment she can leave, Tafka will take care of the Paris Nichsei Melug, and so that nobody will advise her that she should simply leave. Fine. Okay, so the ilo aitila krovel umafkila mine. Fine. Rav Omar says, Rav Anu time of the Beis Shammai, this is the reason for Beis Shammai shenodem toreach besuda umafsida. That Beis Shammai says that that after nisuin she cannot simply walk out, because a fellow, this is going to come up in Ksubis, that's coming up soon, that enodin toreach besuda mafsida. A fellow is not going to go through all the trouble of making a wedding and then just to flush it down the toilet, right? And therefore, if he knows that even after Nisuin and the wedding and all the effort that went into it, she could just literally walk out the next day, so he's not going to want to get married in the first place. And Beis Hillel say, Tarvayu nichalu kidei delay pukalayu kalad ishus. Beis Hillel says, nah, he's not so concerned that the Einodin Torech Besuda Mafsida over here, because they would rather just be married, right? Both she and he, just the name, the optics of being married is something that is beneficial to both of them, and that trumps the concern of the effort of planning the wedding sort of going in vain. Okay, the Mishnah had said Beis Shammai Om Bebal v'chulei oh. So Beis Shammai had said that Davka Meyun applies to the husband but not to the Yavam, whereas Beis Hillel says that Meyun can even be by the Yavam, right? So therefore, if Sarah is married to Ruvain goes to Elwood, and then Shimon, so now there's like a zika between Shimon and Sarah. So Beis Hillel says that Meyun would even apply with Shimon, and she can just leave. Amr Bushai says, Bushai mima'enes l'maimaro ve'ena mima'enes l'zikaso. So says Bushaya that Meyun would apply for mimer, right? So we had learned earlier, right, that for example, if Shimon were to do mimer with Sarah, so then in order to undo that, they would need a get, right? And we're saying that just like in general, a katana who can do meyun can leave without a get. So you're also, if Shimon did mimer, she doesn't need a get, she can just leave. But for the zika, for the actual chalitza, meyun won't be able to undo the chalitza, she's still going to have to do chalitza. Omer Rav Chisda, so says Rav Chisda, my time with Rav Oshaya. How come Rav Oshaya says that meyun works only for the mimer, but not for the actual zika, but she's still going to have to do chalitza? Why can't it work for the zika as well? So, mimer demidaita matzia akra zika debal korcha lo matzia akra. Let's talk about the zika for a second. The zika just kind of comes memele, right? She was married to Ruvain died. Now all of a sudden, she's got this zika situation. She didn't do anything, she didn't bring it upon herself, whereas the mimer, that was more, it kind of came after the fact, right? Shimon did mimer with Sarah. So that she can kind of break up, but the zika, which happened on its own, so then she's unable to do that. But one second, bia de bal korcha umatzia akra. But one second, technically speaking, as we've learned, right? If Shimon does yibum with Sarah, even if she didn't want to, so then it technically works, and they're married, and yet she could then do meyun and just walk out of that. So how could we say that? Look, since zika just kind of comes up on her without her doing anything, kind of on its own, so therefore she's unable to walk out of that with meyun. But technically, if Shimon just does yibum and she didn't want that, it would work and she'd be able to walk out of that, even though that was bal korcha, against her will. So ela bia u'maimer, rather bia and mimer dehu ka'avid matzia akra. No, rather bia, right, yibum, as well as mimer, which are things that Shimon does, so she can just say, I'm out. But zika derachmona rama Allah lo matzakar. But the zika, which is something that the Torah says that it kind of just comes on its own, right? Ruvain died, she now has a zika. The Torah says that she has a zika, so that she cannot just walk out of. Ula amar b'ma'enes af l'zikaso. Ula says no, she can even do meyun from the zika as well. Right? And therefore, if Ruvain dies and now Sarah and Shimon have a zika, she could just be like, brother, I'm out. So, my time, how come? Nisue kamoi ko akra. Because what she's effectively doing is uprooting, she's refusing Ruvain's marriage. That by walking out, she's actually saying that she was retroactively never married to Ruvain, and therefore Memele, she doesn't have any zika with Shimon. Now the Gemara brings up an interesting case. Eisvei we have a kasha. Eisvei Rav Ula. Rav asked the kasha to Ula. Kol sheyichola lema'en v'lo me'ana tzarasa choletzes v'lo misyabemes. Friends, what's this talking about? It's talking about an interesting case. It's talking about, this goes way back to the beginning of the Masechta. This was like the first case that we had, like in the entire Masechta, basically, which was, you have Reuven. Reuven is married to Sarah. Now the thing is that Sarah is Shimon's daughter. Okay? So now if Reuven dies, so then there's no Yibum between Shimon and Sarah, and if there's a co-wife Rivka, then Rivka is Ptura as well because of the Tsaras Erva. Fine. But in this case, it's slightly different, in that Shimon had initially married off his minor daughter Sarah to somebody else, and then she got divorced. And that was a marriage midoraisa, because a father can marry off his daughter midoraisa. So that was a marriage midoraisa, and she got divorced. At that point, she becomes what's called the Yisoma B'chayle, what's it called? Yisoma B'chaye Ab. She's considered an orphan even though her father's alive, and i.e., her father is no longer able to marry her off to somebody else. And if she gets married on her own to somebody else, so then it's midor abanan, and she could do me'un and leave. And that's what we're talking about here. Shimon had married off his daughter Sarah to somebody else, and they got divorced. And then Sarah went and married midor abanan Reuven. And there's also a co-wife Rivka. Reuven dies. So now in this case, the halacha is, it's not considered like an erva that Rivka, the co-wife, would be exempt from doing yibum with Shimon. Rather, right, meaning this is a situation where Sarah was married to Reuven midirabanan. Sarah was only married to Reuven midirabanan. She could have done me'un at any time, but she didn't. So then, when Reuven dies, Rivka does chalitza with Shimon. She does not do yibum. Now the question is, but if Ula is saying that Rivka can always do me'un, and essentially it's going to undo the marriage that she had to Reuven, and therefore it even breaks up the Zika, well then, if she was never married to Reuven, so then Rivka should be able to do Yibum with Shimon. Why does she have to do Chalitza? So again, right, so we have a kasha. If you have Sarah, who was able to do Me'un with Reuven, but she didn't, and then Reuven dies, and Shimon is Sarah's father, Rivka does chalitza with Shimon, she does not do yibum. But why? Tima'in hashta, let Sarah do me'un now, v'te'akrinu l'nisui kamoi, and that will memele uproot the marriage to Reuven, v'tesyabim tzarasot, and let then Shimon and Rivka do yibum. Why does she have to do chalitza? So, and for the Gemara, Tzaras Erva Shiny, no, that's a unique case of the Tzara of an Erva. The Tani Rambam Bar Yechezkel, the Rambam Bar Yechezkel teaches Me'ana beBa'al Muteris La'aviv, that if you have Sarah is married to Reuven and she does Me'un with Reuven, so then she can marry Reuven's father, right? We don't say that it's a situation of marrying your daughter-in-law. No, she did Me'un from Reuven, she could marry Reuven's father. B'Yavam Asur La'aviv, but if Reuven dies and then she does Me'un with Shimon, even though it uproots the marriage to Reuven, still she would be unable to marry Reuven and Shimon's father. Alma, Bishas Nefila, that at the time that she becomes shaykh to the Yavam, that she becomes shaykh to Shimon, Nires Chalasu, she seems like they're married, and therefore that she's the daughter-in-law of the father, of Reuven and Shimon's father. So here also, when right, you have Sarah is the daughter of Shimon, and she's married to Reuven, and there's a Tzara Rivka. So when Reuven dies, and then so when Reuven dies, it's like it looks as though they're like married, and it's as though Rivka is the Tzara of Sarah, and therefore she would be potter. So therefore, better to just do chalitza rather than yibum. Fine, but Ula would say if Reuven was married to Sarah and Reuven dies, now there's a zika between Shimon and Sarah, and Shimon is not Sarah's father in this case, just Reuven's brother, she would be able to do Me'un, and that would say she could do Me'un, and that would basically undo the marriage to Reuven, and that would be fine. Okay. Amar Rav, says Rav, Me'ana baze asura laze, that if, right, let's say there's Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, Reuven dies, and she was married to Reuven, and then she does Me'un with Shimon, so then she cannot do Yibum with Levi. Mididava bailas aget, just like when it comes to get, bailas aget, when it comes to if Shimon were to give a get to Sarah, lav came the itzra lalachad, itzra lulachulu, once she becomes also now to Shimon, she's also to Levi as well, to all the brothers. Hachanami lo shna, therefore says Rav, here also makes no difference. If she refuses Shimon, she refuses Levi and all the other brothers as well. Ushmuel Amar, where Shmuel says, Me'ana bazim uteres laze, whereas Shmuel says no, if she refuses Shimon, she could still do Yibum with Levi. Velodami levailas aget, and it's not similar to a get, because bailas aget, hu dika avid ba, that when it comes to a get, it's Shimon who's giving the get to her, to Sarah, and breaking up the Zika, or affecting the Zika midir abonon. Hacha hika avda bay. Here it's Sarah who is refusing Shimon, but the Amr, what she's saying is lo ra'ena bach v'lo tzavina bach. I'm not interested in you. Bachu de lo ra'ena aval b'chaver cho'ena. Says Shmuel. What she's indicating to Shimon is that she's not interested in marrying Shimon, but she might be interested in marrying Levi. And therefore Shmuel would say that if she does Me'un with one brother, she could still marry one of the others. She could do even with one of the others. Rav Asi Omer says, Rav Asi, Me'ena bazim uteres afilu lo. Says Rav Asi that actually if she does Me'un with one of the brothers, so then if she does Me'un with Shimon, she can even still do Yibum with Shimon. Lema kreboshayis svirle, de Omar eina mima'enes lizikaso. So let's say that Rav is saying like Rab Oshaya. Right? Let's say that Rav, what? So let's say that Rav Asi is saying like Rav Oshaya, right? Because what would you say? Rav Asi says that if she does Me'un with one of the brothers, she can even, right, with Shimon, she can even do Yibum with Shimon. So that sounds like Rav Oshaya, who said that Me'un only works for the Mimer, but it doesn't work for the Zika. So therefore, even if she does Me'un with Shimon, she would still be able to do Yibum. Lema Kreboshai Svirle, De Omar Eina Mima Enes Lizikaso, who says that she cannot do that Me'un doesn't work for the actual Zika. So the Gemara says no. Bechad Yavam Hachinami Dematzi Akra. Rav Asi would say no. If there was only one Yavam, so then yeah, she would be able to do Me'un and then and it would work, and they wouldn't, and it would break up the Zika. But Hacha B'Shnei Yavamin Askinon Te'in Me'un Lechatzi Zika. No, what Rav Asi is saying is that when there's Shimon and there's Levi, and then Sarah does Me'un with Shimon, she could still do Yibum with Shimon because it's only half of right. She's only doing a Me'un to half of the Zika, right? She's only doing the Shimon and Levi, and she's only refusing Shimon but not Levi, and therefore she can then even do Yibum with Shimon if she wants. But if there was only Shimon and no other brothers, so then Rav Asi would disagree with Rav Oshai and would say that she would be able to do Me'un in that case. Fine. Ki also Ravin Rabbi Yochanan, when Ravin came, he said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Me'ana bazim muteres la'achin, that if she refuses Shimon, she could do Me'un with the other brothers. V'lo dulo, and they didn't agree with what Rabbi Yochanan said. Man lo hodulo, who didn't agree? Amar Abai Rav. So Rav says, well, the obvious answer is that Abai says that the obvious answer is Rav, right? Rav says that if she does Me'un with one of the brothers, she can't marry any of the other. She can't do even with any of the other brothers. And Rabbi Yochanan is saying that if she does Me'un with one of the brothers, then she's permitted to the other brothers. So then, clearly, then Rav would disagree with this. Omar Rav Omar says Rav Oshaya v'amila Rav Asi. Rav says that no, it's Rav Oshaya. Rav Oshaya who didn't agree. Some say it was Tak Rav Asi. Rav Asi, how come Rav Oshaya wouldn't agree? Because this implies that the reason why she's permitted to the other brothers, right? And Rashi says that, meaning she's permitted to the other brothers, and even including Shimon, right? Meaning if she does marry with Shimon and there's a bunch of other brothers, so Rabbi Yochanan is saying that she's permitted to all the other brothers, and we could say including even Shimon. And that would be because, what he's saying is that because that you can't just do me'un with part of the zika, and there's all these other brothers, so therefore it doesn't work. Implying that if there was only one brother, then it would work, and therefore that's not like Rabbi Shai. Rabbi Shai would not agree with that. And some say it's taka like that Rav Asi would not agree with it, because you can explain it to say that no, what it's saying is that the me'un would work for Shimon, but just not for but she could then marry any of the other brothers. But Rav Asi would say that no, it wouldn't work for Shimon either, because there's no partial me'un. Fine. Beishamai says that me'un davka has to happen in front of the fellow who she is walking away from. So Beishamai says it has to be in front of him. Beis Hillel says it doesn't have to be in front of him. Tanya Amrulaim Beis Hillel Beishamai. Beis Hillel says to Beishamai, "Valo Pishon Agamel, Pishon the camel driver, Mena Ishto Shelo b'fanav, his wife just kind of his katana wife just walked out, and not in front of him. Maybe he was riding his camel, and he came home and she was gone." Amrulaim Beishamai Beis Hillel. Beishamai says to Beis Hillel, "Pishon Agamel b'mida kfusha modad lefichach modadulog b'mida kfusha." Pishon Agamel was not acting properly with the nichsei melug of his wife, and therefore we didn't act properly with how we handled his me'un, and yeah, she left even not in front of him. Midika'achil peirei pshita nesua hi. But then the Gemara asks, 1 second, I understand, if we're talking about nichsei melug, then that means that they were married. V'amir b'shami nesua lo memayne, but doesn't Beis Shammai say that you can't actually do me'un after marriage? So trei kitrei of dubei. Well, because that's the horn telling me that Shabbos is starting. I should probably wrap up the recording. Alright. Well, anyways, because he didn't act properly with the nichsei melug, so he also didn't act properly in 2 ways. A, that she left even when he was not around, and also even after marriage. Beishamai omen b'fnei bezdin v'chulei. So Beishamai says that me'un has to be in front of bezdin. T'nan hosam, we learned in Sanhedrin, at the beginning of Sanhedrin, ha'chalitza v'me'unin b'shlosha, that chalitza and me'un is done in front of 3 judges. Man Tana. So who's the Tana who says that me'un would have to be in front of 3 judges? Rabbi Beishamai. Rabbi says it's Tavka Beishamai who says that me'un has to be done in front of bezdin. Abaye Omar filutem Beis Hillel. Abaye says you can even say that it's Beis Hillel, because Adkan lokam Beis Hillel eladlo ba'inun mumchin. When Beis Hillel says b'fnei bezdin v'shelo b'fnei bezdin, it means that it has to be in front of bezdin, but it doesn't have to be a bezdin of experts. Aval shlosha ba'inun, but you still need to have 3. Kedetanis, we learn in the Brayso. Beis Shammai omen b'fnei bezdin. Beis Shammai says that me'un has to be in front of bezdin. Beis Hillel omen b'fnei bezdin v'shelo b'fnei bezdin. Beis Hillel says, look, it could be in front of bezdin or not in front of bezdin. Ve'elu modim shetzarich shlosha. But both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that you would need 3 judges, nonetheless. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon machshirim b'shnayim. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon say all you need is 2 judges. Rabbi Yossi bar Manyomi, Rav Nachman halacha koso azog, and Rabbi Yossi bar Manyomi says in the name of Rav Nachman that the halacha is like that pair, that you only need 2 judges. Beis Shammai omen tamayin v'chulei. Beis Shammai says that she can refuse, but then she has to wait until she's older, at which point she'll then refuse and marry whoever she wants. So v'ha me'ano chadazim. Now why is she doing me'un a second time? She already did me'un. So Amr Shmuel says, Shmuel achetagda v'tomar, no, it means till she gets older, and then she says, Rotze ani b'me'unim arishonim, I'm interested in the me'un that I did way back then. Ula Omar says, Ula tarte katoni, it's saying 2 things. Oh, shetimoyin v'tagda v'tearis, either she could do me'un now, and then wait till she gets older, and then get engaged, or shetimoyin v'tinose, or that she refuses immediately, and v'tinose the altar, and then get married immediately. B'shlama Ula, I understand, Ula hanu katoni achetagdil, that I understand why it says, wait until she gets older, v'tinose, and then get married. El Shmuel achetagdil v'tomar mi boile, it should say until she gets older, and then says that she wasn't interested in the original me'un. Kasha, we say it's a good kasha on Shmuel. Friends, I gotta run. That was Daf Kuf Zayin of Masechet Yevamos. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.